You're about to enter a world where control doesn't shout, it whispers. Where manipulation isn't loud, but gentle, patient, and disguised as care. Close your eyes. Let the noise fade, and slowly, we'll begin to uncover the silent tactics used to bend the human mind. If this journey resonates with you, subscribe, and let your mind wander with us again and again. False identity construction. There is a quiet kind of transformation that doesn't begin with noise or struggle. It starts softly, like the shifting of sand beneath your feet. The person you once were begins to fade, replaced by a version sculpted not by your own hands, but by someone else's will. This is how false identities are built, not imposed with force, but offered like a gift. A new self, more pleasing, more compliant, easier to control. You're told it's your best self. You're told this is who you really are, and you believe it, not because it feels right, but because it feels safe. The process begins with subtle suggestions. You're praised when you behave a certain way. You're corrected when you speak too freely, feel too much, resist too often. Little by little, you learn to read the signs, to present the parts of yourself that earn approval, and hide the ones that do not. At first, it's a performance. Then it becomes a habit. And finally, it feels like truth. You become the reflection others want to see. A version of yourself shaped by their expectations, their needs, their convenience. The rough edges are smoothed away. The contradictions are silenced. You forget that you once had your own desires, your own definitions. They're still there, somewhere beneath the surface, but buried under layers of praise, guilt, fear, and silence. Sometimes, this false identity is rewarded. You're told you're doing well. You're admired for your composure, for your consistency, for being easy to understand. But what they love is not you. What they love is the version of you they helped create. One that doesn't threaten, doesn't question, doesn't leave. This kind of manipulation doesn't need to be loud. It thrives in families, in schools, in relationships, in jobs. Anywhere where conformity is prized more than authenticity. You begin to edit yourself in real time. You predict the responses of others and reshape your words before they're even spoken. You learn to wear the right face at the right moment. And if you ever try to remove the mask, if you speak or act in ways that break the script, the pushback comes swiftly. Confusion, withdrawal, sometimes even anger. They say you've changed, that you're not being yourself. But what they really mean is, you are not being the version of you we trained you to be. Over time, the real self goes quiet. Not gone, just waiting. It watches from behind the curtain, hoping for a moment of safety, a chance to step back into the light. But this takes courage. To unlearn the false identity is to risk disapproval. It is to disappoint the people who shaped it. To lose the comfort of being accepted for something that never truly was. And yet, it is the beginning of freedom. Because even if the false self is praised and celebrated, it is still a cage, a beautiful one perhaps, but a cage nonetheless. You do not have to be what others imagined for you. You are allowed to shift, to change, to return, to shed the roles assigned to you, and remember who you were before you were trained to forget. Social proof exploitation. In the stillness of the mind, there is a need to feel safe. And one of the oldest ways we seek that safety is by watching others. Their choices, their movements, their acceptance. We look for signals that tell us we are not alone, that our decisions are not just our own, but shared by the many. This is the foundation of social proof. The quiet instinct that says, if others believe it, maybe I should too. It feels natural, comfortable, like stepping into a stream already flowing, letting it carry you without effort. But what if that stream was guided by unseen hands? What if the current had a purpose not your own? Social proof becomes dangerous when it is not observed passively, but constructed actively when it is exploited. A person, a group, a system, they do not need to control your mind directly. They simply control the crowd around you. And you, like most of us, will follow. You enter a room and see a line. You assume the line is for something valuable. You read a review not because it's yours, but because 10,000 others already did. You laugh at a joke because the room is laughing, not because it truly reached you. And if you don't follow the crowd, you feel a tremor of disconnection. What do they know that I don't? Am I missing something? That doubt, that whisper, is what makes you easy to guide. Marketers, cults, influencers, political machines, they all know this. They manufacture crowds, inflate numbers, choreograph applause. They plant false consensus like seeds in your field of vision, knowing that perception shapes belief long before logic ever speaks. Social proof doesn't scream. It suggests. It nudges. It surrounds you in echoes. You scroll past a product with thousands of likes. You see phrases like, everyone is switching, or most loved. You don't stop to wonder who said it first. You just see agreement, and agreement feels warm. Over time, this changes more than your choices. It changes your identity. You begin to define yourself by the groups you feel aligned with, by the causes you support, the communities you mimic, the opinions that appear safest to hold. Even silence becomes a form of participation. If you don't question the majority, you become part of it, even if your heart hesitates. And the more alone you feel, the more power social proof gains. It becomes a lifeline, a map, a mirror. You look into it, hoping to see validation. But you're only seeing what was placed there to be seen. The manipulation is elegant because it hides in plain sight. There is no demand, no force. Just 1,000 subtle hands pointing in the same direction, until you follow not because you're told, but because it feels like the only choice. To break free from it is not to reject all consensus. It is to pause, to ask, is this truly mine? Do I believe this because it fits, or because it comforts? In the quiet of that question, you begin to hear something softer, your own voice, timid at first, but growing clearer. And in that moment, the current loses some of its pull. Reciprocity principle. There's an unspoken rhythm in human interaction, a quiet contract older than language, older than memory. You give me something, and something inside me awakens. Not just gratitude, but an urge, a need to return the gesture, to restore the balance. This isn't taught. It lives in us, deep, instinctual, ancient. This is reciprocity. It's the silent current that holds society together. A gift freely given, a kindness offered. And from it, the pressure begins to rise. Not through demand, but through expectation. You felt it. Someone helps you move. Later they ask you for a favor. You feel a twist in your gut. Not obligation, exactly, but something close. You want to say no. But the kindness they once gave you now speaks louder than your voice. That's the moment reciprocity becomes a tool. When kindness is used not to connect, but to control. This tactic is subtle. It doesn't scream, it doesn't coerce. It plants a seed and waits for your guilt to grow it. Because guilt is predictable. It's powerful. It disguises itself as virtue. You're a good person, it says. You pay your debts. And so, manipulation begins with a favor. An unsolicited act of generosity. A gesture that makes you feel seen, safe, even valued. But it's not unconditional. It's an investment. And the interest will come due. In relationships, this appears as emotional bookkeeping. I did this for you. I sacrificed for you. You owe me your attention, your time, your silence. Every smile, every effort, carefully filed away. Not for love, but for leverage. Sometimes, you're not even asked to repay in equal measure. Sometimes the return is obedience, loyalty, agreement, even silence in the face of wrongdoing. And the brilliance of it is, you don't realize it's happening. Because it looks like gratitude. It feels like duty, and if you resist, you're the one who changes, not them. You become cold, ungrateful, difficult. You're painted as selfish. Because how could you not repay someone who gave so much? But ask yourself, was it truly given? Or was it bait? This manipulation thrives in environments where goodness is currency, where being nice is a shield, and being assertive is framed as cruelty. It preys on those raised to please, to serve, to never disappoint. And so the pattern spreads. In families, workplaces, friendships. One person gives endlessly and expects everything. Another person receives with confusion, then guilt, then submission. Soon, you find yourself saying yes, not because you want to, but because the weight of no is unbearable. You start measuring your freedom against someone else's disappointment. And the worst part? You start believing that you're in the wrong. But here's the truth. A real gift does not require return. A real act of kindness does not chain the receiver. It liberates them. So when you are given something, be it time, affection, money, help, pause. Ask yourself, was this offered freely? Or was it a quiet deposit in an emotional bank account? Healthy reciprocity breathes. It gives room for refusal, for delay, for imbalance. It doesn't count. It doesn't chase. Manipulation, on the other hand, demands. Silently, but forcefully. It keeps score. It waits. And when it calls in the debt, it expects full compliance. To free yourself, you must recognize the weight, not just of what you were given, but of what was expected in return. And then, you must do the hardest thing. Refuse the game. To give only what feels right. To say no without apology. To see guilt as a tool, not a compass. And to remember that your worth is not measured in how much you owe others, but in how true you are to yourself. Stockholm Syndrome. Imagine a room, locked, windowless, silent. Inside, a person sits, not just restrained by walls, but by a strange, invisible thread woven between them and their captor. At first, it's fear. Then, familiarity. Then, something harder to name. Attachment. This is the paradox of Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where hostages, literal or emotional, begin to feel warmth, empathy, even loyalty, toward the very person who endangers them. It sounds irrational, but it's not. It's survival. When a person is trapped, physically or psychologically, and the one holding power over them also becomes the source of small mercies, the mind adapts. To resist is to suffer more. To bond is to survive. And the bond becomes real. The syndrome was named after a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, where hostages, held for 6 days, began defending their captors. Even after their release, they refused to testify. They raised money for their defense, and the world watched in disbelief. But this isn't just a rare response to extreme trauma. It plays out in far more familiar places. In relationships where abuse is followed by affection, where isolation is paired with intimacy, where cruelty is softened with just enough comfort to make escape feel like betrayal. The person being harmed begins to justify the harm. I know they love me. They didn't mean it. They had a hard day. The lines blur between threat and tenderness, between captor and companion. And here lies the genius of the manipulation. When you depend on someone not just for safety, but for your sense of reality, you begin to surrender your judgment. You silence your intuition. You rewrite your memories. You become grateful for moments that should never have been necessary in the first place. A kind word after weeks of insults. A gentle touch after a violent outburst. A smile after punishment. The victim begins to measure kindness against the backdrop of abuse, and any softness feels like love. Over time, the roles reverse. The abuser becomes the fragile one, the one who needs help, the one who can't control themselves, and the victim becomes the caretaker, the protector, the one who explains away the damage. It's not weakness. It's not foolishness. It's a brilliant, painful adaptation to prolonged powerlessness. Even in cults, we see this dynamic. Leaders who isolate, control, degrade, then offer belonging, meaning, purpose. The followers don't see chains, they see home. Children raised by manipulative or emotionally volatile parents often exhibit signs of Stockholm Syndrome. They defend the parent. They take the blame. Because to face the truth, that the person who was supposed to protect them was the source of their fear, is unbearable. So the mind protects itself by loving the threat. In workplaces, it appears when employees defend toxic bosses. They're under a lot of pressure. They're brilliant, just misunderstood. Slowly, the abuse becomes normalized, even admired. The heart, longing for connection, will bind itself to whatever it can, even if that bond destroys it. What's worse, others don't understand. They ask, "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you speak up? Why are you still defending them?" But the victim doesn't see captivity. They see meaning. They see closeness. They see someone who needs them. And in this confusion, the cycle continues. The captor tightens their grip, and the captive holds tighter still. To break free from Stockholm Syndrome is not just to escape the situation. It's to rewire perception, to grieve a false connection, to admit what I called love was survival in disguise. And that is terrifying. But it is also the first step back to truth, learned helplessness. There's a certain kind of silence that settles in after too many failed attempts. not the silence of peace, but the quiet of surrender, of a mind that once tried to fight, but now only watches. This is not laziness, not weakness. It is something far more dangerous. Learned helplessness. It begins subtly. A child cries, and no one comes. A student studies, and still fails. A person speaks up, and gets ignored. Again, and again, and again. At first they resist. They shout louder, try harder, hope stronger. But over time, the effort wears down. The mind begins to whisper, "What's the point?" And eventually, it stops trying. This phenomenon was first observed in animals. In a cruel experiment, dogs were placed in cages where they were given shocks they couldn't escape. No matter what they did, the pain continued. Later, even when the door was opened and escape was possible, they stayed. They didn't even try to flee. Why? Because they had learned that nothing they did mattered. And what was true for those animals is hauntingly true for people. In abusive relationships, this manifests as passivity. The victim doesn't leave, not because they enjoy the abuse, but because they've been conditioned to believe that leaving won't make a difference, that no one will help, that maybe they deserve it. In broken school systems, students give up, not because they can't learn, but because they've been told, directly or indirectly, that their effort is pointless, that they're not smart, that success is for others. In workplaces, employees fall into a routine of silence. Ideas are dismissed, initiatives crushed. Every no becomes a lesson. Don't bother. And soon, they stop raising their hand at all. But the scariest part of learned helplessness is that it rewires the brain. It doesn't just shape behavior, it reshapes perception. You begin to see the world not as it is, but through the lens of futility. Opportunities feel like traps. Support feels suspicious. Change feels dangerous. Even when freedom is offered, you hesitate. Because if you hope again, you risk pain again. And pain, once chronic, becomes something the mind will do anything to avoid, even if it means surrendering possibility. And here lies the true cost. You don't just stop fighting. You stop imagining. You forget what it feels like to want more, to believe in better, to reach, to risk. You settle into the numb gray of survival. You call it realism, but it's grief in disguise, and society often misreads it. You're not trying hard enough. You're just lazy. Just be more confident. But that's like telling a locked door to open itself. Like telling a bird with clipped wings to fly. Recovery from learned helplessness is not about motivation. It's about healing. First, you must notice the cage. Not the physical one, but the mental one. The belief that your actions don't matter. The silent agreement you made with despair. And then, you must gently break it. With tiny acts of defiance. With proof, however small, that change is possible. That effort bears fruit. That not all doors are locked. It can start with saying no when you always said yes. Or asking for help, even when you're sure it won't come. It means surrounding yourself with people who mirror back your strength, not your fear. And when you fail, because you will, you must not return to silence. You must speak louder. You must try again. Because the truth is, you were never powerless. You were just trained to believe you were. And if belief can be learned, it can also be unlearned. Even in the darkest parts of the mind, a door remains. And sometimes, all it takes is the courage to reach for the handle one more time. Fearmongering fear is among the most ancient tools of control. It predates politics, religion, and even language itself. It speaks directly to the nervous system, bypassing logic, analysis, and self-reflection. It doesn't need to argue. It only needs to be felt. When we are afraid, we surrender without question. We don't debate or discuss, we look for protection. And in that moment, whoever claims to offer safety instantly gains power. Fearmongering is the systematic exploitation of this vulnerability. It's not simply the use of fear, it's the design of a world in which fear is ever present, carefully planted, and constantly nurtured. In a society governed by fear, people are easier to guide, to silence, to manipulate. And the most insidious part is that they often believe they are acting of their own free will. It starts with a threat, real or imagined. Something vague, hard to verify, but emotionally potent. They're coming for your children. This group wants to destroy your way of life. The world is on the brink of collapse. It's rarely concrete. The power of fear lies in its ambiguity. A visible threat can be confronted, but an invisible one? That lingers. It festers. It multiplies in the imagination. And when fear becomes the lens through which reality is filtered, anything unfamiliar becomes dangerous, and anyone different becomes suspect. Politicians use it to rally support. News media uses it to boost engagement. Religions have used it to ensure obedience. Advertisers use it to sell products that promise safety or certainty. Even in interpersonal relationships, fear can be used to isolate, to gaslight, to control. No one else will love you like I do. If you leave me, you'll regret it forever. You'll never survive without me. These phrases don't command loyalty. They paralyze with dread. And the effects are profound. When people are afraid, their brains literally shift into survival mode. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and complex thought, slows down. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, takes over. In this state, we are more reactive, more impulsive, more tribal. We cling to what feels safe, even if it harms us. We reject nuance. We accept extremes. And perhaps most tragically, we give up the capacity to imagine a different future. Fear-mongering thrives on repetition. A lie told once may be questioned. A fear whispered daily becomes a worldview. Over time, people begin to fear the absence of fear. They feel uneasy in peace, restless in silence. And so, they seek out the next danger, the next crisis, the next alarm bell to ring. This cycle becomes self-reinforcing. Fear becomes familiar, and what is familiar becomes trusted, even if it's toxic. This is how empires are built, how wars are justified, how neighbors turn against each other, not through reason, but through the careful engineering of anxiety. And those who resist the narrative, they're labeled naive, dangerous, or complicit because the fear must be maintained. If it crumbles, the entire structure built upon it begins to wobble. Breaking free from fear-mongering doesn't mean becoming fearless. That's neither possible nor wise. Fear has a purpose. It keeps us alive. But when fear is constantly stoked to keep us small, obedient, and divided, it becomes a cage. And the worst part? That cage is often invisible. We build it ourselves, brick by brick, with every headline we consume without question, Every authority we follow blindly, every time we silence our inner voice because we're told it's dangerous or wrong. To escape it, we must learn to question not only the message, but the messenger. Who benefits from this fear? What do they gain when we panic, when we submit, when we turn away from each other in suspicion? True awareness begins when we realize that not all fear is ours. Some of it is planted. Some of it is inherited. Some of it is sold to us, wrapped in the language of safety, progress, or morality. We must remember that those who sell fear rarely live in it. They profit from distance. They build walls, not to protect themselves from threats, but to keep the fearful masses dependent and divided. Their power depends on our disconnection from ourselves, from one another, from reality. So what do? We pause. We breathe. We ask questions, especially when the unanswers terrify us. We seek nuance in a world addicted to black and white. We remember that the world is rarely as dangerous as we are told, and far more complex than fear allows. Fear will always be part of the human condition. But fearmongering? That is a choice. One we can recognize, one we can resist, and ultimately, one we can refuse. Memory manipulation. Memory is not a vault. It is not a file cabinet, neatly organized and untouched by time. Memory is clay, malleable, softened by suggestion, reshaped by repetition, vulnerable to silence. And those who understand this, not just theoretically but practically, hold a terrifying power. The power to edit your past in order to control your present. You see, we trust our memories because they feel real. They carry emotion, texture, narrative. But memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. Every time you recall an event, you are not retrieving a perfect replica. You are rebuilding it. And in that rebuilding, the doors are open to influence. This is where manipulation begins. Not by creating new memories from nothing, but by bending existing ones just enough to serve a purpose. Maybe they downplay what hurt you, or exaggerate how much they helped. Maybe they insist something never happened until you begin to doubt your own recall. Or they repeat a narrative so many times that it overwrites your original truth. And over time, your certainty erodes. You start to wonder, did I misremember that? Was I being too sensitive? Maybe they were right all along. This erosion is not accidental. It is intentional. A slow, consistent rewriting of your personal history that serves one goal: control. Because when someone can alter your perception of the past, they don't just shift your memories, they reshape your identity. Think about that. If your memories define who you are, your values, your fears, your choices, then whoever controls those memories can rewrite who you believe yourself to be. Gaslighting is the most well-known tactic in this field. It starts small. A denial here, a contradiction there. That never happened. You're imagining things. You're being dramatic. The goal is not to replace your memory all at once. It's to make you distrust it, to render your internal compass unreliable. But memory manipulation goes deeper than gaslighting. It can involve subtle suggestions. Remember how happy you were back then, even if you weren't. Or selective framing, only recalling the good moments of a toxic relationship, the noble intentions behind harmful actions. Over time, this creates a distorted archive, a curated museum of moments designed to elicit guilt, dependence, or gratitude. And once the manipulation takes root, it becomes self-sustaining. You begin to defend the very people who altered your memories. You reject those who challenge the false version of your past. You become the guardian of your own deception. This technique is used in relationships, in politics, in cults, in marketing. It's how abusive partners convince their victims that the abuse wasn't so bad, or that it was deserved. It's how regimes revise history books to glorify their rise and erase their crimes. It's how ideologies reshape collective memory to manufacture loyalty. And it works because it taps into our deepest need to make sense of our lives. If the revised memory is more coherent, more emotionally satisfying, or more socially reinforced, we often accept it, even if it contradicts what we once knew. The scariest part? The more time passes, the harder it becomes to retrieve the original memory. Not because it's gone, but because the manipulated version has been reinforced more often. Like a path in the woods. The more you walk it, the clearer it becomes, while the old path grows over, vanishes. So how do you fight this? First, by anchoring your memories. Write them down, speak them out loud, share them with those you trust. Don't let them float unguarded in your mind, vulnerable to the wind of someone else's agenda. Second, learn to spot the signs. If someone constantly reframes events to cast themselves as the hero or you as the unreliable one, pay attention. If you find yourself doubting things you once knew clearly, ask why. Ask who benefits. And finally, trust the physical. Memory isn't just mental, it's embodied. Sometimes your mind has been manipulated, but your body remembers. A tightening in the chest, a flicker of dread, a wave of sadness you can't explain. Don't dismiss those signals. They are the language of the truth beneath the narrative. Manipulating memory is not just a tactic. It's a slow dismantling of your reality. It severs you from your past, isolates you in the present, and makes you dependent on the manipulator to make sense of your own story. But memory, though fragile, is not defenseless. It can be reawakened, reclaimed, rewritten by you, not by force, but through awareness, through clarity, through resistance. Because in a world where your memory can be weaponized, remembering becomes an act of rebellion. Public shaming. There was a time when shame served a quiet, personal function. A signal from within that you had violated your own values. It was internal, reflective, a painful but private check-in with your conscience. But somewhere along the line, shame was taken out of the shadows and dragged into the public square. No longer a whisper, it became a weapon. Public shaming is not about justice. It's about control. It's about spectacle. It is the theater of humiliation, where the crowd becomes judge, jury, and executioner, not for the sake of truth, but for the pleasure of power. At its core, public shaming is the externalization of moral enforcement. Rather than guiding individuals towards self-awareness, it crushes them beneath the weight of collective judgment. It is not designed to help the shamed grow. It is designed to mark them, isolate them, erase them. And in the age of technology, this ancient tactic has evolved into something more permanent, more viral, and more profitable. A single misstep, captured or even rumored, becomes content. A person's lowest moment becomes a meme. Their pain becomes engagement. Their identity becomes a target. But what makes this tactic so effective in manipulation isn't just the punishment, it's the threat. The looming possibility of public disgrace keeps people silent, compliant, and easily shaped. It's the unspoken rule. Don't step out of line, or we'll ruin you. So we self-censor. We dilute our opinions. We avoid nuance. We comply, not because we believe, but because we fear exposure. Fear of becoming the next one. And thus, the manipulator wins. Because in a culture of public shaming, fear becomes a tool of conformity. This tactic works on both macro and micro levels. Governments use it to silence dissent. Corporations use it to direct outrage away from themselves and onto scapegoats. Influencers wield it to consolidate followers and purge critics. And in personal relationships, it appears in more insidious forms. Mocking someone in front of friends, revealing secrets to win sympathy, turning social circles into battlegrounds of loyalty. Even the language shifts under public shaming. Accountability is often a mask for vengeance. Calling out becomes a performance. And apologies? They're no longer for healing. They're demands for submission. The manipulator doesn't want remorse. They want surrender. A public display of brokenness to reinforce their power. But what's most disturbing is how easily the crowd plays along. There's something addictive about outrage, something thrilling about watching someone fall. It gives us a sense of righteousness, of unity, of belonging. We participate not just because we agree, but because we're afraid not to. Because siding with the crowd makes us feel safe. And so, public shaming becomes a ritual, a ceremony of purification through destruction. We burn the heretic to feel morally clean, and we convince ourselves it's justice, when it's often just cruelty in costume. The long-term effects are devastating. For the shamed, there is no path back, no process for restoration, no community waiting with compassion. Just exile, just silence, just the echo of 1,000 voices saying, "You're not one of us anymore." And the crowd? It forgets, moves on, finds a new target. Because the hunger for outrage is never satisfied. It feeds on novelty. It thrives on repetition. It needs someone to hate, to shame, to destroy, so that it doesn't have to look inward. In this environment, the manipulator flourishes. Because every time the crowd rises to shame someone, it lowers its own capacity for thought, empathy, and self-reflection. It becomes easier to control, more predictable, less human. And yet, public shaming can't exist without an audience. It demands participation. It needs you to point, to laugh, to retweet. It lives off your click, your comment, your silence. Which means the power to break the cycle lies not just in resisting the manipulator, but in refusing the role of spectator. In choosing not to join the mob, in asking, is this justice or is this theater? Am I helping or am I harming? Do I really know the whole story? Because the truth is, we are all flawed, all vulnerable, all capable of mistakes. And in a world that weaponizes shame, no one is truly safe. Today's spectator can be tomorrow's scapegoat. So be slow to shame, quick to question. And when you feel the pull of the crowd, pause, breathe. Remember that the loudest voices are not always the wisest, and that real strength is not in tearing others down, but in choosing not to. Scapegoating, when a system begins to fracture, when tensions rise, when contradictions can no longer be ignored, there arises a need, a hunger, not for truth, not for resolution, but for blame. And so, a figure is chosen, marked, isolated, offered up like a lamb to the collective unrest. This is scapegoating, one of the oldest psychological and social manipulations in human history. A ritual of misdirection, a sacrificial illusion. It is the tactic of taking a complex, unsolvable issue and simplifying it into a person, a face, a name. Someone we can point to and say, they are the reason. It works because it comforts. It compresses fear into a shape we can recognize. It transforms anxiety into anger. And anger is easier to carry, more satisfying to release. We don't have to fix the real problem. We just have to get rid of them. In relationships, scapegoating often begins subtly. One person starts to absorb all the blame. You're too emotional. You always ruin things. If you weren't like this, everything would be fine. Over time, they become the designated source of dysfunction, even as others refuse to acknowledge their own roles. In families, the scapegoat is often the one who sees too much, feels too deeply, speaks the uncomfortable truths. They are punished not for their flaws, but for their clarity. Because the system needs peace, not honesty. And the easiest way to maintain peace is to assign one person the burden of being the problem. In organizations and politics, it scales. Leaders fail, systems collapse, trust erodes, and the scapegoat is selected. Sometimes they are an insider, sacrificed to protect the brand. Sometimes they are an outsider, turned into a symbol of everything that's wrong. Either way, the act is the same. Blame displaces responsibility. Outrage replaces accountability. What makes scapegoating especially manipulative is its disguise. It wears the mask of moral clarity. We're just holding them responsible. They deserve it. It's justice. But justice examines the system. Scapegoating avoids it. It demands blood, not change. And once the scapegoat is chosen, the rules no longer apply. Their complexity is erased. Their humanity stripped. Every gesture is reinterpreted through the lens of guilt. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every defense becomes proof of wrongdoing. They are no longer a person. They are a vessel for everyone else's discomfort. This tactic is not just about punishment. It's about purification. The group projects its darkest impulses onto the scapegoat so that it doesn't have to face them internally. It's emotional outsourcing. If they're gone, then we're good. But of course, the real issues remain. And so, the cycle repeats. A new scapegoat is found. The ritual begins again. Psychologically, scapegoating offers several manipulative advantages. It unites the group. Nothing bonds people like a shared enemy. It preserves the illusion of control. We found the root of the problem. It protects the manipulator. By directing attention outward, they avoid introspection or blame. In cults, this tactic becomes doctrine. The outside world is evil. Dissenters are infected. Anyone who questions the narrative is immediately painted as a threat. Their exile is necessary, not regrettable. The group's purity depends on it. In abusive relationships, the abuser will often create crises, then blame the victim for their own reactions. If you hadn't cried, I wouldn't have yelled. You're making me hurt you. The goal is to destabilize the victim's sense of justice until they begin to internalize the blame themselves. And that is the final, most corrosive stage of scapegoating, when the scapegoat accepts the role. When they begin to wonder, maybe I really am the problem. When they contort themselves to fit the guilt. When they apologize for existing. But this tactic only works if the scapegoat stands alone. That's the key. Isolation, silence. No witnesses, no advocates. Because once someone else says, "Wait, that's not true," the illusion begins to crack. The spell starts to break. So what can you do? If you're the scapegoat, document everything. Anchor yourself in reality. Seek allies, even if only one. Remember, your worth is not defined by the projections of others. You are not the story they are telling. If you're witnessing scapegoating, speak. Not always loudly, but clearly. Refuse to participate in the ritual. Ask questions no one wants to answer. What's the full story? Is this really about them or something deeper? And if you've ever been tempted to scapegoat, to relieve your stress by blaming someone else, pause. Ask, what am I avoiding? What part of this is mine? The moment you stop blaming and start reflecting, the system shifts. The cycle halts. The ritual ends. And the scapegoat, finally, becomes human again. Seeds of self-doubt. Doubt, in its healthy form, is a guide. It slows us down when we rush. It reminds us to think, to reflect. But when doubt is seeded not by circumstance, but by design, when someone deliberately cultivates it in your mind, it becomes something else. A method of quiet control. Planting self-doubt is not a loud act. It is not screaming, accusing, or commanding. It is quiet erosion. A comment here, a hesitation there, a raised eyebrow at the wrong moment. The manipulator doesn't attack your ideas. They ask if you're sure about them. You sure that happened the way you think? I don't know. Sounds a bit extreme, don't you think? These questions may seem harmless at first, but that's how they enter. Not with force, but with subtlety. Like fog creeping through a crack in the door. Doubt doesn't confront you. It whispers. It suggests. It infects your self-perception without setting off alarms. Over time, the whisper becomes internalized. You repeat it to yourself. Maybe I am being dramatic. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe it is my fault. A person once confident in their judgment now second-guesses everything. And the manipulator steps back, clean hands, no blame, while you do the rest of the work for them. In relationships, this shows up when one partner becomes the overreactor, the unstable one, the problem. Not through evidence, but through suggestion. Each emotional response is framed as excessive. Each memory is questioned. And eventually, the victim begins to monitor themselves more than the manipulator ever could. In families, it starts early. A child says they're hurt and hears, "You're fine." They cry and are told, "You're too sensitive." Slowly, they learn not to trust their feelings, not to speak up. Their self-image is built on uncertainty, molded by the message. Your reality is unreliable. In workplaces, it can be masked as feedback. A boss offers vague criticism, moves the goalposts, praises in private, but critiques in public. You leave meetings unsure if you're doing well, or on the verge of being fired. The confusion is the point. Doubt keeps you compliant. What makes this tactic effective is its invisibility. The manipulator doesn't have to be right. They just have to make you wonder if you're wrong. And once that seed is planted, it grows without help. It feeds on every mistake, every silence, every moment of hesitation. Eventually, you hesitate before speaking. You question your memory. You apologize when no apology is needed. You shrink. You defer. You forget what it felt like to trust yourself. But self-doubt doesn't have to win. Start by asking, where did this doubt come from? Was it mine to begin with? Who gains from me being uncertain? Trace the voice of doubt. Follow it back. Often, it will not be your own. Then, name your reality. Write it down. Say it aloud. Return to what you know. Because doubt thrives in silence and vagueness. But truth, even whispered, begins to clear the fog. Surround yourself with clarity. People who reflect you honestly, not manipulatively. Who challenge you without undermining you. Who ask questions to understand, not to destabilize. And most of all, remember, your perception matters. It is not perfect, but it is yours. And no one else has the right to rewrite it without your consent. Once you remember that, the seed of doubt has nowhere to root. The ground becomes solid. The fog begins to lift. You begin to return to yourself. Exploiting empathy. Empathy is one of humanity's most beautiful traits. It connects us. It allows us to understand suffering we've never felt. To feel joy for triumphs we did not earn. It bridges the gap between self and other, softening judgment, encouraging compassion. But like all powerful tools, empathy is vulnerable to misuse. And in the wrong hands, it becomes a lever. A way not to connect, but to control. To exploit empathy is to weaponize the very thing that makes someone kind. It is to recognize a person's softness and turn it into a cage. The manipulator does not win by overpowering. They win by making you want to lower your guard. And once it's lowered, they step inside. This tactic begins innocently. A shared hardship, a sob story, a confession of past wounds. And suddenly, you feel responsible. Not just for listening, but for healing. The manipulator paints themselves as broken, fragile, misunderstood. And because you are empathic, you respond with care. They test your capacity for forgiveness, for patience, for understanding. They might say, "I've just been through so much," after yelling. Or "Dans, I'm really trying," after a betrayal. They know that your empathy makes you hesitate, makes you rationalize, makes you hold your own needs in suspension while tending to theirs. In abusive dynamics, this is especially common. After cruelty comes remorse, the tears, the apologies, the declarations of pain. "I'm just afraid of losing you. I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm a monster, aren't I?" The victim, once again, becomes the caretaker. The cycle resets. Empathy has been turned into glue and a trap. And the worst part? The manipulation is disguised as vulnerability. So it doesn't feel like control. It feels like connection. You feel needed, important, special. You see the pain behind the behavior, and you want to help. You want to be the one who understands. But there's a difference between empathy and surrender, between compassion and self-erasure. Empathy should not mean excusing patterns that cause harm. It should not mean staying silent to avoid hurting someone who's already hurting. And it should never mean tolerating abuse out of fear that walking away will break someone further. This tactic also shows up in professional settings. A colleague who consistently misses deadlines offers emotional reasons. "I've just had a rough week. I'm not in the right headspace." If you're empathetic, you pick up the slack. once, twice, then always. Your workload grows, your resentment builds, but your voice quiets, because saying no feels cruel. Manipulators who exploit empathy are often highly perceptive. They know how to position themselves as victims, even when they're not. They steer the narrative away from accountability. If you bring up a boundary, they respond with pain. If you assert your needs, they make it about their suffering. You know how hard this is for me. You know I'm trying. Over time, your own reality begins to shrink. You stop asking for what you need. You stop expressing discomfort. You feel guilty for even feeling hurt. And in the background, the manipulator's behavior continues, unchallenged, protected by the shield of your kindness. So how do you break free? First, recognize the pattern. Ask yourself, does this person consistently use emotional disclosures to avoid accountability? Do I leave conversations feeling more responsible for their feelings than they are for mine? Am I allowed to be upset or just supportive? Second, reaffirm your own emotional boundaries. Empathy is not an obligation, it is a gift, and it can be given without being exploited. You can care deeply about someone and still hold them accountable. You can understand their pain and still choose to walk away. Third, separate guilt from truth. You may feel guilty for stepping back. That does not mean you are wrong to do so. Guilt is not a compass. It is often a signal that someone else's needs have overwritten your own. And finally, remember that healthy empathy is mutual. It flows both ways. If your empathy is always met with demands, with silence, with guilt, it's not being received, it's being harvested. Empathy is sacred, but it is not a contract to be used, drained, or manipulated. True connection is not built on sacrifice. It's built on shared care. You are not cruel for protecting your energy. You are not heartless for walking away from pain that consumes you. You are not selfish for needing reciprocity. You are simply human. And your empathy is still yours to give, on your own terms.